black dwarf is a theoretical stellar remnant, specifically a white dwarf that's cooled sufficiently that it no longer emits heat or light. Because the time required for a white dwarf to reach this stage is calculated to be longer than the current age of the universe, some 13.77 billion years, no black dwarfs are expected to exist in the universe as of now. The name black dwarf has also been applied to the hypothetical late-stage cooled brown dwarfs, or substellar objects that do not have sufficient mass to maintain hydrogen-burning nuclear fusion. Hi everyone, Vega here, and in today's video we're going to look at one of the darkest, most desolate objects in our universe, black dwarf stars. So let's get to it. A white dwarf is what remains of a main sequence star of low or medium mass, below approximately 9 to 10 solar masses, after it's expelled or fused all the elements for which it's sufficient temperature to do. What remains is a dense sphere that cools slowly by thermal radiation, eventually becoming a black dwarf. If black dwarfs were to exist, they would be extremely difficult to detect because by definition, they emit little radiation. They would, however, be detectable through their gravitational influence. Interestingly, various white dwarfs cooled below 3900 Kelvin were found in 2012 by astronomers using the MDM Observatory's 2.4 meter telescope. These stars incredibly are estimated to be as much as 11 to 12 billion years old, and almost indeed as old as the universe itself. So where is the theoretical limit between a white dwarf, a black dwarf, and what about the shades in between, grey, brown perhaps, those kind of colours? Well, I looked through the internet and it was difficult to get an answer, so for the purposes of this video, we're going to assume that black dwarf means the star is radiating zero heat and light, and has a temperature close to absolute zero. Because the far future evolution of stars depends on physical questions which are poorly understood, like for example the nature of dark matter or possibility of proton decay, it's not known precisely how long it will take white dwarfs to cool to complete blackness. Barrow and Tipler estimated that it would take 10 to the 15 or a quadrillion years for a white dwarf to cool to 5 Kelvin. However, if weakly interacting massive particles, or WIMPs, exist, it's possible that interactions with these particles could keep some white dwarfs much warmer than this for approximately 10 to the 25 years, or 10 octillion years. If protons are not stable, white dwarfs could also be kept warm by energy released from proton decay. For a hypothetical proton lifetime of 10 to the 37 or 1 duodecillion years, yes, I think I said that correct, Adams and Laughlin calculate that proton decay will raise the effective surface temperature of an old 1 solar mass white dwarf to approximately 0.06 Kelvin. Although obviously this is cold, it's thought to be hotter than the cosmic background radiation temperature, and so doesn't necessarily fit into our category of black dwarf. So it must be said that the true meaning of black dwarfs, that which is completely cold, is not coming around anytime soon. That said, however, some speculate that massive black dwarfs may eventually produce supernova explosions. This could occur if pycnonuclear fusion, now that is a tongue twister, which is a type of density-based fusion, processes much of the star into iron. In turn, this lowers the Chandrasekhar limit for some black dwarfs below their actual mass, and once this point is reached, as you may know, the star collapses on itself, initiating a runaway nuclear fusion and resulting in a supernova explosion. Likewise though, this isn't happening anytime soon either. We already know that there may not even be any black dwarfs in the universe yet, but this adds another level of time to the game. The most massive to explode would be near 1.35 solar masses, and it would take of the order of 10 to the 1100 years. Now this is a number that I'm not even going to try naming, but you can appreciate anything with 1100 zeros after it is staggering. But if that isn't staggering enough, the least massive black dwarfs to explode would be about 1.16 solar masses, and would take of the order of 10 to 32,000 years, and this would total around as many as 1% of all black dwarfs. One major caveat to this though is that the time frames are so long that proton decay could decrease the mass of a black dwarf far more rapidly than any pycnonuclear fusion occurring, and thus preempting and preventing any supernova explosion. It's just unknown whether either of these things is possible. In our Sun series videos, we looked at the future of the Sun, so don't forget to check those out if you haven't already. But I'll be honest, We never look quite that far into the future. Once the Sun starts fusing helium in its core and ejects its layers in a planetary nebula in about 8 billion years from now, it will become a white dwarf, and over trillions of years, eventually it will no longer emit any light. After that, the Sun will not be visible to the equivalent of the human naked eye, removing it from optical view even if the gravitational effects are still evident. The estimated time for the Sun to cool enough to become a black dwarf is around 10 to the 15 again, 1 quadrillion years. Although again, it could take much longer than this if the weakly interacting massive particles do exist, as we've already mentioned. Could we theoretically inhabit the Sun if it were a black dwarf? Well, there is a slight problem in that the gravity on the surface of a white dwarf star, which is essentially the same as a black dwarf, is 350,000 times that of gravity on Earth, or 350,000 G. And given that at less than 5 Gs the human body struggles and experiences damage to the heart, arteries, kidneys and the brain, as well as dizziness, nausea and fatigue, studies have even shown that the human body could not withstand gravity greater than 5 Gs without passing out. So I think we can rule out human habitation as we know it, although maybe digital creatures could perhaps one day inhabit its surface one way or another. A solar mass white dwarf has a radius of only 8,800 kilometers, so its surface escape velocity would be around 5,500 kilometers a second, which is an astonishing speed. The question of when does a white dwarf turn into a black dwarf is not fully understood. After around 10 trillion years, or around 1,000 times the present age of the universe, the surface of a typical white dwarf will have dropped in temperature so that it's out of the visible light regime. But for many, many, many years after that, the body remains and cools and loses heat at an exponentially slower rate. Perhaps the universe's weirdest stars, the black dwarf, is truly yet to exist. One day our Sun will walk that path though, but human evolution will have either long since extinguished or thrived along with pretty much all the other stars shining in the sky. The future of the universe is no doubt cold and black as things stand, and black dwarf stars, short of self-exploding, will without question form a large part of that future. Thanks for watching and consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you'd like to support the channel further, you could consider buying me a coffee and I'll link this in the description. If you've had any videos or subjects that you'd like to see brought to life, don't forget to let me know in the comments below. It could just be your idea next week that shows up. Take good care of yourselves, particularly in the new year, and look after your friends and family well, and I'll see you in the next one.